Basically, what I'm going to do today is a quick little review of the 37 books that I read this year. I know that I started the year off happily. I had a bunch of books that I got for Christmas. And so the first book I finished in 2022 was Before We Were Strangers by Renee Carlino. And I rated it 5 stars. It is the best romance book I think I've ever read without being too cheesy. It was a mix of a college love story and then when they're grown and reconnecting without giving anything away. I highly recommend it for just a fun, lighthearted romance. So that was my first my first read of the year and my first 5-star read of the year. And I was in a good mood at the beginning of the year because my next book was also a 5-star read. Have you seen Velez by Catherine Ryan Hyde? From the Redheads podcast review of this, they didn't like it nearly as much as I did, and I could see it is kind of like a middle school level history, be a good person type book, but I don't know, I really enjoyed it. It's just a story of this boy and he becomes friends with a woman who survived the Holocaust. I liked it a lot. The next book I read was Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. I rated it 4.75 stars. I really liked it. Didn't rate it 5 stars because I didn't feel like it kept me hooked as much as the previous 2 books I read, but obviously it's right up there. It made me laugh a lot. It was a quick read, but I remember in the moment feeling like there were parts that dragged on and were harder to read even though it's a shorter book. And then I read God Bless This Mess, Hannah Brown's autobiography, and I rated it 3.5 stars. I think she's just too young to be writing an autobiography. Obviously she has to do it while she's in the peak of her career, but I don't think I gained any knowledge from it except I guess about her life, but looking back I might even rate it lower because it's a big ol' okay, who cares. She had to seize the moment to write an autobiography, but she didn't have anything profound to say. And then I read Confessions of a Shopaholic. I have it here rated 4.75 stars, but I now would revise and make that 5 stars. I might actually move down all the other 5 stars so that this is my top book of the year because Confessions of a Shopaholic stuck with me. I have read 4 of the books in this series. It's just so lighthearted, so funny. I'm just obsessed with this character and everything that she's gone through. Actually, I think the first one might have been 4.75 is reasonable. My favorite was the third one, Shopaholic Gets Married. I'll get to that, but highly recommend this series to anyone who's just looking for a laugh. If you relate to being a bit of a shopaholic, then I'm with ya. Okay, then I read The Simple Wild. This was about a girl who goes to Alaska and lives with her estranged father and falls in love, whatever. 3.5 stars from me. That's being generous. It was incredibly cheesy. Weird to read about Alaska from this perspective. I mean, it wasn't like Southeast Alaska, so not where I'm from or what I'm familiar with, but it just was not good. It was cheesy. And then I read Luckiest Girl Alive by Jessica Knoll. I gave it 4 stars. I'm still really struggling with this book. The movie came out recently and I watched it. I liked the movie well enough. I feel like this book wasn't bad, but it put me in a bad headspace. And not because of the graphic stuff that happens. I can handle that. But this narrator, the main character, her self-hatred and snarkiness and just negativity, it put me in a bad headspace while I was reading this book. And that's something I found a lot this year, that whatever book I'm reading, I'm kind of in that headspace while I read it, which is why reading Shopaholic kind of made me into a shopaholic sometimes. But Luckiest Girl Alive, it was okay. It was unexpected, and I usually really like dark books, so I can't decide if I thought it was a good book, and I don't think I'd recommend it to anyone. But maybe the movie, because it's just a couple hours, it's not going to stick with you. Then I read The Matchmaker by Elin Hildebrand. I gave it 4.5 stars. I really like that author. I've read a lot of her books now. This one doesn't stick with me so much. I'm trying to remember, because it's kind of hard to differentiate her books. I did really like the idea of the matchmaker, she can physically see if people are going to be good together. But I think that besides that, there wasn't anything that majorly stuck out in that story for me. It was just a light, fun, easy read. Next, I read The Undomestic Goddess by Sophie Kinsella, which is the author of the Confessions of a Shopaholic series. I found this book in one of those free little libraries. It's actually where I found the Shopaholic book, so whoever was donating clearly liked this author. And I wasn't sure if I was committed to Shopaholic yet, but I knew that I enjoyed the writing of the first book, so I read this other book by this author, and it was fun too. It was a little bit of a cheesy story. This girl is like a lawyer, but she makes a big mistake, and then she's running away, and she somehow ends up becoming the housekeeper for this really rich family, but she doesn't know anything about housekeeping or cooking or any of that, so it's just like her lying her way through things, which is what this author is really good at writing and making it funny. It wasn't like the most amazing book I've ever read, but it was pretty funny and it captivated me, so I think 4.5 is a very reasonable rating for that. And then I went back to Ellen Hildebrand and read Golden Girl, which is kind of a big hit this year. I've heard a lot of people talking about it. I guess it just came out last year. I really enjoyed it. Again, I think it was really similar to The Matchmaker in that it's like the story of a older woman on Nantucket, but Golden Girl had more of a mystery plot, which I enjoyed. So 4.5 stars, yes, I liked it a lot. Oh, and now we have another 5-star read, The Phantom Prince, My Life with Ted Bundy by Molly and Elizabeth Kendall. Elizabeth Kendall is the woman who dated Ted Bundy for like 7 years through a majority of the time he was killing people. And so that was really interesting to read from her perspective. Obviously really dark and creepy. I like true crime stuff. I never really cared about Ted Bundy until I read this book. Now I feel like I am way more fascinated by him because just the whole perspective of him having this double life. And then also the Zac Efron movie is based on this girl's book and story. It was first published in 1981, but she updated and expanded it, and that included the preface of the book. She wrote to add in that like this book came out in 1981, she was still in love with him back then. So it's really interesting the way that now she's like, okay, now I know like he was a full monster and that was really messed up. But at the time, like she really struggled with him being a murderer because she loved him and lived with him and he helped raise her daughter. And then I read A Disease Called Childhood, Why ADHD Became an American Epidemic. I was just interested in this. I see a lot of stuff about ADHD on TikTok, so I wanted to hear like a different perspective. I gave it 4 stars. It's nonfiction, so there were parts where I'm like pushing myself to read it, but overall, I think I like learned a lot about like raising kids from this book. It was interesting. And then I read Hello Molly, Molly Shannon's autobiography. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I'm a big Molly Shannon fan and I always have been. And I didn't realize like her mom died when she was a little girl, and a lot of Superstar, which is one of my favorite movies, was kind of loosely based off her childhood with like Catholic school upbringing and stuff. So there were a lot of Catholic references that I understood, as well as you know, just being a really weird kid and being really into SNL. And that's all stuff I related to. And it made me like her even more. And then Portrait of a Mirror, I believe I finished this in May because I remember finishing it at the beach. I gave it 3.5 stars. This was a book that was highly recommended. It is a book that I think I could have really enjoyed, but the timing of when I read it, I just wasn't getting into it. I gave it 3.5, but I can understand how some people love it. And then I think if anyone like truly hates it, they're not smart enough. So I'm on the maybe not smart enough for it, and I just think I read it at the wrong time. All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata. This I gave 3.5 stars, probably deserves lower because looking back I regret reading it. It was way too long, 570 pages, slow burn romance. This girl like moves to this small town where she was raised, and her mom died on a hiking trail when she was young, and so she ended up moving, but then she wants to come back and like escape her life and gets into hiking. And the hard part of it for me was that like hiking is not that hard. I couldn't imagine what trail she's doing that she kept getting into these predicaments. But the romance was okay. It was predictable. It was cheesy. And the problem with that book is it should have ended at about 80%, but it decided that it needs to tie up absolutely every loose end. And so it was getting cheesier and cheesier. Okay, then I read The Arrangement by Kirsten Modglin. This book I gave 3.75 stars, and I remember being conflicted about what to give it because it was a page turner. I read it really quickly, but the twist at the end was so ridiculous. It twisted like 3 times, and each time got so much more ridiculous that by the end I was like, okay, that was stupid. But I enjoyed it the whole way, so I don't know if it should be highly rated or low rated. I don't think I'd recommend it to anyone, but I enjoyed it. Okay, then I read Eliza Starts a Rumor by Jane L. Rosen. This was a book I heard the concept of a long time ago, which is basically this woman is like bored with her life and starts a rumor on like a Facebook group. Again, I really enjoyed it. It kept me captured. I just remember not liking a turn that it took. It got like too dark, too deep, and I was like, keep it lighthearted. I was having fun. So I gave it 4.75, which is higher than I remember thinking of it. So I guess I enjoyed it more than I enjoy looking back on it. And then I read When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. This is a nonfiction memoir. He was a neurosurgeon, so I learned a lot about neurosurgery, and it was interesting. I don't know. I'm trying to think. Like, not a lot of it really stuck with me besides like the long, difficult hours that he worked. And it's kind of crazy that he'd do like 48-hour shifts and then have the week off. And it's like, we don't really want brain surgeons to be on their 48th hour awake, do we? He was a brain surgeon, and then he knew that he had cancer and was going to die when he's writing this book, I guess. So it was a little bit like reflective on life in general. And I don't remember anything being extremely profound or sticking with me in that regard, but I enjoyed the book for the most part. I thought that he probably could have been a better husband, but I gave it 4.25 stars, so. Okay, and then I read The Wife Upstairs. This was another like thriller mystery where I didn't really like the twist. It made it a little bit stupider. 3.75 stars. Okay, now this is when things get good. Shopaholic Takes Manhattan. I gave it 5 stars because this girl, she just gets herself into these predicaments, and they're so funny and so well written. And then Shopaholic Ties the Knot is the one that really sticks with me. 5 stars, of course. I was reading this in the spring when we were playing the Evil Dead video game all the time, and the loading screens would take so long, so I'd be literally like reading my book, like not wanting to set it down. That's how good it was. I remember reading the end of this book, and it's her wedding. DJ was streaming live. I'm sitting there reading it, playing this game. Like, that was a good book. Then I read Mrs. Kennedy and Me, an intimate memoir, and I gave it 5 stars. This is by Clint Hill. He was the Secret Service agent for Jackie Kennedy while John was in office. So that was a really interesting look at that time period and Jackie's influence. Like, obviously she's influential to everyone, but I'm not super familiar with like what she did while John was in office, and now I am super familiar. And we also learned more about John Jr. And then obviously the ending is really freaking sad and had me crying in the park. I went to the park to like suntan and read, and I'm just laying there and everyone's like playing with their kids, and then I was like sobbing because JFK dies. And like, I should have been prepared to not read that in public, but I didn't realize it would hit me so hard. So I really liked that book. And then I read Girls with Bright Futures. I gave it 3.75. This is another that probably could have been lower rated. My 3.5 seems to be for books I don't like. This was a weird story. This was about high schoolers trying to get into college, and I think it was Stanford. It says they can only take one student from this prep school, so the moms like go crazy. I read it because the Redhead Book Club read it. I have all their books like on hold at the library, like I'm going to read them all at some point, but that's not a story I would have chosen on my own. And then I read 28 Summers. I read this while I was on vacation. This was definitely one of my top books of the year. Again, it's Ellen Hildebrand. 5 stars. Most beautiful love story. She knows how to write a man that's not cheesy, and the romance was fantastic. Like, I will recommend that to anyone looking for a good romance. I couldn't put it down. Like I said, was on vacation, but like anytime I'm waiting for my sisters to get ready or something, I was literally pulling out my book, not my phone. That's how you know it's a good book. Okay, then I read Poison for Breakfast by Lemony Snicket. I picked it up at like a little bookstore while I was on vacation. It was really quick, 168 pages. I don't know, it's Lemony Snicket. His writing's just entertaining. It was just interesting. I think I read it all on my flight home, and I gave it 4.25 stars because I like his writing a lot, but in the end, I'm like, okay, what was the point? Then I read The Sixth Wedding, which is a short story in sequel to 28 Summers. You have 4.75 stars because I like all those characters, like the author. It was a short story, so like. Then I read The Good Sister by Sally Hepworth. This is when my reading's starting to slow down. This book wasn't bad, but it didn't like captivate me until the end. It got more interesting. And then again, I remember thinking it was kind of cheesy. I'm not a plot twist person anyway. There's not a lot of plot twists that I've enjoyed. So I give it 3.25. I don't remember why I disliked it so much. Then I read The Rumor by Ellen Hildebrand. Oh my goodness. This one was hard to get through. Can I even remember what happened in it? I gave it 3.75. So I think the thing with this author is I always like her writing. So I'm captivated, and I'm not like, oh my gosh, this is stupid. But I can't remember what the story is besides like what the spoiler twist is. So I'm gonna say this was not her best. And then next I read Truly Madly Guilty by Leanne Moriarty because that's another author that I love. The way she writes characters, I'm always in. But again, not her best. Actually, this was one that I got from the library, didn't read it in time, then got it again from the library later. So that's how much it didn't suck me in, but I finished it. And can't say anything majorly stuck with me from it, but I gave it 4.0. That's pretty good. That's pretty nice of me to do that. Then I read I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, 4.25. Finally, a book came out that I was able to just read quickly and enjoy. I love the title and the cover, and so I don't know if there was anything necessarily in the book that was like super profound or stuck with me, but I'm glad I got to read it like right when it came out and there was so much hype about it. I bought it in hardback because I like the cover so much, so I have it on my shelf. Then the next book I listened to as an audiobook, Good Morning Monster, which is a therapist shares 5 heroic stories of emotional recovery by Catherine Gildener. This book was interesting. I'm really glad I chose to listen to it in audiobook format. It's 5 different stories of people who had really, really terrible childhoods and how they have worked with this therapist to overcome that. And so it was, just interesting to hear about what horrible lives people can have. And that's pretty much what I got out of that. Okay, then I read The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I'm getting meaner with my reviews here because I gave this one 2.5. I stand by that. This book was a letdown. It's a great example of good idea, bad execution. Basically, this girl is like killing herself at the beginning, and she gets this library that's like between heaven and earth, and she gets to go through like all the different lives she could have had, all the different choices she could have made. I didn't really agree with like this idea that you could have had everything. She's like, what if I never quit swimming when I was a kid? And she goes to that life and she literally was an Olympic athlete. And I'm like, I bet for people like me, there is no universe where I would have been an Olympic athlete. Like, there's no sport that I could have stuck with. And like, I guess she was a really good swimmer when she was a kid, but it just got kind of unbelievable. It's like, oh, what if I stayed playing piano when I was a kid and then you go into that life and you're the biggest singer-songwriter on the earth? It's like, that's not necessarily how life works. It's not all or nothing, but I guess for the purpose of this book, it was just like the most dramatic life possible. But it's like, you know what, in any reality, you probably would have still had a normal life, no matter what you chose when you were a child. And then in the end, of course, not to spoil it, but she like learns that her life is exactly how it should be, and she learns like what she's missing and what she needs to do in order to be happy. But it was just, I don't feel like I learned anything from it. I thought the writing was bad. So yeah. Then I read the Enneagram Guide to Waking Up. I gave it 4 stars. I read this really quickly because I mostly skim except for my number. I'm a type 1. I soak up the Enneagram stuff all the time. I'm obsessed. So it was just a little bit more, but I don't think I learned anything specific to take away from that. There are just times in my life when I'm feeling very, very type 1 and I look up anything I can find about like, what am I supposed to do? Because the Enneagram has helped me identify these things in myself that I am that type, but I found very little answers on what do I do when I'm feeling really crummy about it. So that's what I was looking for when I read it, and I don't recall an answer. Okay, the next book I read, Run, Rose, Run, which is Dolly Parton and James Patterson's collab. This book took me so long to read. It's 448 pages, but I started it in September and I finished it right before Halloween. I had to turn off my Wi-Fi so that my library loan wouldn't go away on my Kindle, and in the end, it was not worth it. It was just the definition of a book that is not good enough to keep me wanting to read it, but not bad enough to give up on. But in the end, I think I should have given up on it. It was bad. I listened to the audiobook of Little Weirds by Jenny Slate. I chose to listen on audio because I love her voice, and this book was pretty weird, but there were some parts of it that just made me feel like I love being a woman and I want female friendships like the ones she describes. Okay, and then I was like in such a slump after Run, Rose, Run that I was like, I'm going to read the next Shopaholic book. So I read Shopaholic and Sister, which was the 4th one. I would say this is the worst one just because it was so random. I guess I gave it 4 stars. Looking back, maybe give it a little bit more compared to all these other books I've read. It pulled me in. I read it in like a week. It was really entertaining, had me laughing. It puts me in a good mood to be reading a good book. And like this character, when I read her, I like who I am. I don't know, like some kind of silly things and mistakes in my life that were made the week I was reading this book. I just felt like, oh, I'm just like her. Instead of being hard on myself, I let it be silly. So it's a good book series for me. Okay, and then the last book I finished was The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, and I gave it 4 stars. I thought that it was good. It did captivate me to an extent. There were some slow parts, but I read it pretty quickly. I actually really liked the twist at the end of that one. I guess most twists are too cheesy for me, but that one shocked me. And so I enjoyed it. I liked that book. And I actually was been thinking about it a lot and like looking up like what people online think about it. So that's another great example of if I either really love a book or really hate a book is when I will look up what other people thought. But yeah, so that's the last book I finished, and then I'm currently about to finish Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. And then the next book I have on loan from the library is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. So hopefully we'll read that pretty quickly because I've heard really good things about it. But I'm also really trying to not finish books that I don't like. For example, last month I was trying to read The Kitchen Front, which looked great, was a redhead's book I've been wanting to read, but just didn't captivate me, and I decided I'm not going to read books that don't captivate me anymore. So I did not finish it. I stopped at about 20%, which is fair. And I'm gonna let myself do that more in the future because I really feel like Run, Rose, Run sucked the life out of me. Yeah, so that is every book I've read so far. I should be reading about 3 more before the end of the year so that I meet my goal. And if anything really sticks out to me, I'll vlog about it. That's all.